Around here, captains earn respect. And sweetheart, you haven't earned a single thing yet. Captain Walter Brennan waited for a reaction. First Officer Amara gave him none. What, the silent treatment? You think keeping your mouth shut makes you look professional? Let me show you what I think of girls who waltz into my cockpit acting like they belong. Without hesitation, he tilted his paper cup and poured the steaming coffee down the front of her crisp white uniform shirt. Amara wiped a slow drip from her chin and looked directly at Brennan. I'm going to need your employee number, Captain. Captain Brennan had no idea that the employee number Amara was about to request would be the very first item written on her desk. The desk that until that morning had belonged to her father, the owner and chairman of Sterling Continental Airways. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. The coffee in Amara's travel mug had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She didn't drink it, she just held it. Both hands wrapped around the cup and she stared at the building across the road. Sterling Continental Airways Operations Center, Terminal 3, her airline. The signage above the glass doors was new. Polished steel letters in the signature sterling navy and gold. Crew members moved in and out of the entrance in pairs, rolling their cabin bags, laughing, swinging coffee cups from the kiosk in the lobby. Amara watched them and said nothing. She had been sitting in this rental car for 14 minutes, not because she was nervous. She needed to see them before they saw her. She needed to understand what she was walking into before she walked into it. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She already knew who it was. You still in the car? Her father, Marcus Sterling, 63 years old, 4 decades in commercial aviation, and he still checked in like a worried father because that was exactly what he was. She typed back, getting out now. His response came fast. Amara, you can walk in there with your last name on full display. One phone call, just say the word. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Plain first officer uniform, 3 stripes on the shoulder boards. Her name tag read A. Carter, Copilot. Carter was her mother's maiden name, technically accurate, strategically perfect. She typed back, I need to see who they really are when nobody's watching, not who they perform to be at a press release. 3 dots appeared. Then, be careful with Brennan. He's the loudest in that hangar for a reason. She put the phone in her pocket, picked up her flight bag, and got out of the car. The crew lounge on the second floor of the operations center smelled like burnt coffee and microwave breakfast sandwiches. A desk officer barely glanced up when she signed the visitor log out of habit, and she moved down the main corridor toward the pilot's briefing room. She had studied the building schematics for 2 evenings. She knew exactly where she was going. The briefing room sat at the end of the east corridor. She could hear it before she reached it. Loud voices, sharp laughter, the scrape of rolling chairs across vinyl tile. She pushed the door open. The room held 7 people. 4 pilots clustered around the coffee station, loud and loose, still riding whatever joke had just landed. A 5th man, tall, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, the kind of seasoned good looks that knew exactly how good they were, leaned against the counter with 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, holding court. 2 younger first officers stood behind him, hovering at the edge of the joke, laughing on cue. And in the corner, nearly invisible, a young flight attendant in uniform stared at her tablet like she was trying to disappear into the screen. Amara walked to the coffee station. She reached past one of the standing pilots and picked up the carafe. The captain leaning against the counter stopped talking. She felt his eyes before she heard his voice. Hold on there. The voice was smooth, almost friendly, almost. You lost, sweetheart. She didn't look up. She filled her cup. I'm talking to you. His voice had an edge now, still wearing its smile, but the smile had teeth. New crew checks in at the dispatch desk downstairs, not the captain's lounge. She turned and looked at him for the first time. He was older than she expected, late 50s maybe, the kind of face that had spent 40 years staring at glass cockpits at 35,000 feet. 4 stripes. Name tag, Brennan. His eyes moved over her slowly, top to bottom, the way men look at things they've already decided don't belong in the room. I found the lounge just fine, she said. Thank you, Captain. One of the first officers behind him snorted into his coffee cup. Brennan's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes shifted. "Oh, she talks," he said, more laughter, louder now. "Listen, sweetheart." He pushed off the counter and took a step toward her. Slow, easy, like he had all the time in the world and the cockpit was his living room. "I don't know what regional puddle jumper outfit you transferred from, but Sterling Continental has standards. And part of those standards is," he paused and looked at the others, "performing for them now, knowing your place when you're new." The room went a little quieter. Amara looked at him. She said nothing. She brought her coffee cup to her lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. That silence, that complete, unbothered silence, did something to Brennan's face. A muscle in his jaw ticked. His chin came up. He glanced over his shoulder at the others. A slow grin spread across his face, wide and rehearsed, the kind that meant he had already decided what came next and wanted an audience for it. "You know what, sweetheart," he said, turning back to her. "I should explain something to you, since you're brand new." He clasped his hands together like an instructor about to begin a check ride briefing. "Every new first officer who comes through our hangar, they go through a little tradition. It's how we do things here at Sterling. Kind of he tilted his head, savoring the word, initiation." Behind him, one of the younger first officers let out a short, eager laugh. The others shifted, leaning in. "A welcome initiation," Brennan continued. His voice was warm, almost paternal. That was the worst part, how warm it sounded. "Every single new Copilot goes through it. No exceptions. It's not personal, it's just tradition." He spread his hands wide like he was being perfectly reasonable. Amara looked at him. "Is that right, Captain?" It wasn't a question. "That's right." His grin got wider. He picked up the large paper cup of coffee sitting on the counter beside him. He held it loosely, casually, swinging it slightly at his side. The lid was off. Steam rose from the surface in lazy spirals. "We like to make sure our new pilots understand how things work around here. Make sure they know their place from the very first pre-flight." He paused, his eyes locked onto hers. "Helps avoid confusion later on at altitude." The room was very quiet now, everyone waiting, everyone watching. Brennan looked back at his audience one more time, and whatever he saw in those eager, grinning faces seemed to settle something in him. He looked back at Amara. "Welcome to Sterling Continental, sweetheart," he said, and he raised the cup and poured. The coffee came down in a slow, deliberate cascade. It hit her right shoulder first, soaking through the white poplin of her uniform shirt, spreading dark and steaming across her chest and down her front. It ran in rivulets down to her gold-striped epaulets. It pooled at her belt line and dripped onto the floor. The room erupted, howling, hollering. One of the first officers doubled over, slapping his thigh. Another grabbed the counter for support, his face turning red with laughter. The young flight attendant in the corner had gone very still, her tablet forgotten in her lap, her eyes wide and fixed on the floor like she was trying to physically remove herself from the room through sheer force of will. The laughter hit the walls and bounced back, filling every corner of the briefing room. Brennan stood in front of her, empty cup in hand, grinning from ear to ear, waiting, expecting tears. Expecting the frantic, embarrassed scramble of a young woman who didn't know how to handle herself. He got none of it. Amara stood exactly where she was, both feet planted, shoulders straight. The coffee dripped from the cuffs of her sleeves onto the floor in a slow, steady rhythm. One drop, then another, then another. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't move a single muscle in her face. She just looked at him, not with anger, not with hurt. With something Captain Brennan clearly had no category for. A total, unmoving iron calm that made his grin flicker for just a half second before he caught it and held it back in place. The laughter around him started to thin at the edges. A few of the pilots who had been howling began to quiet, watching her with something that wasn't quite amusement anymore. Amara reached out slowly and set her coffee cup down on the counter, perfectly level. No trembling, no rush. Then she turned her head and looked at Brennan the way a person looks at something they are filing away permanently. "I'm going to need your employee number, Captain Brennan." The laughter surged back, louder than before, fed by relief. Brennan tapped the badge clipped to his shirt pocket and rattled off the digits in a mocking sing-song. One of the first officers behind him echoed the numbers back like it was the punchline to the greatest joke ever told at 35,000 feet. She memorized it. She memorized every number, every face, every laugh. The young flight attendant in the corner had not made a sound. She was staring at her hands so hard it looked like she was trying to read something written on them. Amara memorized her too. Then she turned and walked out of the briefing room, back straight, steps even, not one moment of hesitation. The laughter followed her all the way down the corridor. She let it. The single-occupancy restroom at the end of the second floor was empty. Amara locked the door behind her. The laughter from the briefing room was still audible, muffled now, but there. She could hear it bleeding through the walls, rising and falling in waves. Someone kept setting it off again every time it started to die down. Probably the first officer with the red face. He had that kind of energy. The kind that needed to keep poking at something long after the moment had passed. She stood in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at her was soaked from her collarbone to her belt. Her uniform shirt had gone from crisp white to a dark, blotched brown across the entire front. The gold of her 3 first officer stripes was barely visible beneath the staining. A faint sticky residue was already forming where the coffee had dried fastest along her collar. She turned on the cold tap. She cupped water in both hands and pressed it against her neck. Then she straightened up and looked at herself again. She had been here before. Not in this restroom, not in this building, but in this moment. This exact moment. She had been here more times than she could count. 6 years flying regional jets in the upper Midwest. 2 years on long-haul international with a competitor before her father had finally convinced her to come home to Sterling. 8 years total in flight decks that fell quiet when she walked in, of logbooks that got scrutinized harder than her male colleagues, of credit that went somewhere else, of being watched for any crack, any flinch, any sign that she didn't belong in the left seat or even the right one. She had never given them one. She wasn't going to start today. She grabbed a stack of paper towels and pressed them against her shirt, working from her shoulders down. Slow, methodical. She blotted the worst of it. It wasn't enough to fix it, but it was enough to face the room. She thought about her father's voice that morning. Be careful with Brennan. She thought about Brennan's face. That wide, performed grin right before he lifted the cup. The way he'd looked back at his audience first, making sure they were watching. The way he'd called it a tradition, an initiation. Said it like he was doing her a favor. Said it like he had done it 100 times before. Because he had. That was the part that settled in her chest like a stone. Not the coffee, not the laughter, the ease of it. The complete and total comfort of a man who had done some version of this over and over again and had never once faced a consequence for it until now. She dried her hands. She straightened her uniform as best she could. She looked at herself one last time in the mirror. Stained shirt, damp epaulets, coffee at her collar. And she made a decision that she felt in her whole body. The way you feel a door closing behind you. She unlocked the door and walked out. The main crew assembly room on the 3rd floor was filling up by the time she reached it. 8:27 a.m., 3 minutes before the morning shift briefing. She took a seat in the 3rd row, center. Not the back, not tucked to the side. Center, where she could see every face in the room and every face could see her. Brennan came in 2 minutes later with his entourage trailing behind him. They were still loose and easy, riding the tail end of the morning's entertainment. Brennan spotted her immediately. His eyes moved over her coffee-soaked uniform and one corner of his mouth pulled up. He dropped into a seat in the front row without breaking stride. The 2 first officers settled in beside him. One leaned over and said something low into Brennan's ear, and Brennan's shoulders shook once with a suppressed laugh. Chief of Flight Operations Howard Mercer shuffled to the front of the room at 8:29, tablet in hand, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He was 58 years old and looked every year of it, a man who had perfected the art of looking just busy enough to avoid being asked anything directly. His eyes passed over Amara without stopping. She watched him. She watched all of them. The room settled. Mercer cleared his throat and opened his mouth, and the door at the back of the room opened. Not the side door, the main door. Both panels pushed wide. Vice President of Flight Operations Elena Chen walked in first. Full corporate uniform, the navy blazer with the sterling gold pin on her lapel. Every button fastened. The kind of entrance that didn't need an announcement because the suit made one on its own. Behind her, Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Continental Airways, and the man who held the founding shares of the company, Marcus Sterling. The room came to attention in a single involuntary movement, chairs scraping, spines straightening. The low murmur of conversation cutting off like a switch had been thrown. Mercer took a full step back from the podium so fast he nearly stumbled. Marcus Sterling walked to the front of the room and stood behind the podium. He did not rush. He set his hands flat on the surface and looked out at the assembled crew with the patience of a man who had waited his entire career for this particular morning. His eyes found Amara in the third row. She gave him the smallest nod. He looked back at the room. "Pilots and crew of Sterling Continental Airways," he said. His voice filled every corner without effort. The result of 40 years of giving briefings to boards, regulators, and aviation authorities across 3 continents. I am here this morning to formally introduce someone to you. Brennan's posture shifted just slightly. She has 8 years of commercial flight experience. She holds an airline transport pilot certificate with type ratings on 3 wide-body airframes. She graduated top of her class from Embry-Riddle, completed her advanced jet training at Flight Safety International, and spent the last 2 years as a captain on long-haul international routes with our principal competitor. Marcus Sterling paused. She has been selected by the board of directors and the executive committee after a 14-month internal review to serve as the new vice president of flight standards and crew conduct for Sterling Continental Airways. The room was absolutely still. She is the youngest person ever appointed to this position in this airline's history. She is the first black woman to hold this title, and she is my daughter. The sound that moved through the room was not a sound exactly. It was the absence of sound that comes when 43 people simultaneously stop breathing. "Effective today," Marcus Sterling said, "she holds full operational authority over every pilot, every captain, and every check airman in this company." He stepped to the side. Amara Sterling Carter stood up from the third row. She didn't hurry. She buttoned the front of her uniform jacket as she rose, smoothed it once with both hands, and walked to the front of the room. Her shirt was still stained dark from collar to belt. The coffee had dried in uneven patches across her chest. She had not changed. She had not cleaned up. She had walked in exactly as Captain Brennan had left her. She reached into her jacket pocket and placed a small leather case on the podium. She did not open it yet. She looked out at the room, at the stunned faces, at the slackened jaws and the wide eyes, at the pilots who had been laughing 40 minutes ago and were now sitting in complete suffocating silence. She looked at the 2 first officers in the front row. Their faces had gone the color of old chalk. She looked at Brennan. Brennan stared back at her. The easy confidence was gone. The grin was gone. What was left underneath was something she recognized too. The expression of a man who had just realized fully and completely that he had made the worst mistake of his 30-year career. Good. She wanted him to sit in that for a moment. She wanted every person in that room to sit in it. Then she spoke. "Good morning. I've already met some of you this morning. I think introductions are largely unnecessary at this point." Nobody laughed. Nobody so much as smiled. The assembly room held its breath. Amara led it. She stood at the front, both hands resting lightly on the podium, and looked out at the room. Some of them looked confused. Some looked terrified. A very few, looked like something cautious and careful was happening behind their eyes, like they were recalculating everything they had done in the last hour. Brennan hadn't moved. He was still in his seat in the front row, jaw tight, eyes fixed on her with an expression that had cured itself into something hard and unreadable. Amara opened the small leather case on the podium. Inside was the silver pin of a Sterling Continental executive officer. She held it in her palm for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Then she pinned it to her lapel, right there in front of all of them, directly above the largest coffee stain on her shirt. She looked back up. "I'm going to keep this short," she said. "I don't believe in long speeches. I believe in work. You'll learn that about me." She paused. "Flight assignments remain unchanged for today. I'll be meeting with each crew and each captain individually over the next 2 weeks. Until then, do your jobs." Dismissed. Chairs scraped. People moved. The noise of a room coming back to life filled the space around her. Nobody approached her. Nobody welcomed her. That was fine. She hadn't come here to be welcomed. Marcus Sterling found her in the corridor outside the assembly room, his face tight with the effort of staying professional. "Amara," his voice was low. "What happened in that briefing room before the assembly? That is a terminable offense. I can have Brennan pulled off the flight schedule today, permanently." "Not yet," she said. He stopped walking. "Not yet." He repeated it like he was checking whether he'd heard it right. "Amara." The man poured hot coffee on the new vice president of flight standards, in front of witnesses on her first day. "I know what he did." She kept her voice even. "And I need you to trust me. If I pull him today, every captain in this airline who is loyal to him, and there are more than a few, goes underground. I spend the next year fighting a war I can't see." She met his eyes. "I need to see the whole structure first, all of it. Then we move." Marcus Sterling looked at her for a long moment. The worry on his face was real, and she knew it came from the right place. He had fought too hard to get her here. He didn't want to watch her get torn apart in the first week. 72 hours, he said finally. "Then I act whether you're ready or not. That's all I need." He held her gaze a moment longer. Then he nodded, buttoned his jacket, and walked back toward the elevator. She watched him go. Her office was on the 4th floor, end of the east corridor, small, functional. The previous occupant had left behind a wilting orchid on the window sill and a framed photograph of a 747 over the Alps that was hanging slightly crooked. She straightened the photograph on her way to the desk. She sat down and opened her flight bag. She pulled out a legal pad and a pen. At the top of the first page, she wrote 2 names, Walter Brennan. Then she paused and added the names of the 2 first officers who had laughed loudest. She underlined all 3. Then she sat back and thought. She thought about the briefing room. She thought about the way the laughter had moved through the room. Easy, rehearsed, like muscle memory. Like a group of people who had done this before and expected no consequences because they had never received any. That kind of comfort didn't come from one incident. That kind of ease was built over time, over repetition, over years of being told in one way or another that the rules applied to everyone except them. She thought about the young flight attendant in the corner. Dark hair, 2 service stripes on her sleeve, hands clasped in her lap, eyes down, completely silent while her colleagues fell apart around her. That one had stayed with her. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." The woman who entered was in her mid-50s. Civilian clothes, a charcoal blazer, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She carried a thick manila folder in both hands and held it slightly in front of her like an offering. Vice President Sterling. Her voice was careful, professional, but her eyes, dark and steady, said something more than professional. They said, "I have been waiting for someone like you for a very long time." "Carter," Amara corrected gently. "Carter is fine." "Please sit." "I'm Beatrice Whitman, Senior Administrative Coordinator for Flight Operations. I've been with Sterling Continental for 22 years. Amara looked at her, really looked at her. "Sit down, Ms. Whitman," she said. Beatrice sat. She placed the folder on the desk and slid it across without being asked. Amara opened it. Personnel files, incident reports, complaint histories going back 7 years. All of it organized, indexed, and completely unsolicited. She looked up. "How long have you been keeping these?" she asked. Beatrice's expression didn't change. "Since the 3rd time I watched it happen and nobody did anything about it." Amara held her gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at the files. "Close the door on your way out, Ms. Whitman, and thank you." Beatrice nodded once and was gone. Amara worked through the files for 2.5 hours. The afternoon light moved across her desk in long, slow angles. The operations center hummed around her. Phones, footsteps, the distant crackle of the dispatch frequency down the hall, normal sounds. The sounds of a building that believed today had been just another day. She turned a page. She added a 4th name to her legal pad, then a 5th. Her pen moved steadily and she did not look up. Outside her office window, the parking lot was emptying as the afternoon shift began its pre-flight cycle. She watched the crews filter out toward the terminal in small groups. Some of them heading to the same airport hotel they probably went to between rotations, laughing about the same things they always laughed about. At the far edge of the lot, she saw Brennan. He was standing beside his car, phone pressed to his ear. His free hand moved as he talked, sharp, emphatic gestures. He wasn't laughing now. He was making calls. She watched him until he got in his car and drove away. Then she looked back down at her legal pad. 7 names, 8, 9. She turned another page. She had work to do. The assembly room filled fast the next morning. 8:25 a.m., 5 minutes before the morning shift briefing. Pilots and cabin crew filtered in through the main door in 2s and 3s, still carrying the loose, easy energy of any other Wednesday. Coffee cups, half-eaten breakfast sandwiches. Conversations that picked up mid-sentence from wherever they'd left off in the corridor. But there was something else under the energy today, a new alertness, a sharpness. Every head that turned as someone new entered, every conversation that dropped slightly in volume when they spotted the corner where Amara sat. She was already seated, 3rd row, center, the same seat. She had chosen it deliberately, not hidden in the back where she could observe without being seen, and not planted in the front where the choice itself would announce something. She had also worn a clean uniform today. Same 3 first officer stripes, even though everyone now knew the 4-stripe pin was sitting in her office drawer. She wanted to remind them that she had walked in as one of them, and they had still chosen to do what they did. Brennan came in at 8:27. He was different today. She clocked it immediately. Yesterday's loose, reckless energy, the grinning performance of a man who believed he was untouchable, had been replaced by something more controlled, more careful. He moved through the room with deliberate professionalism, collegial, helpful, visible. He held the door for a senior flight attendant. He answered a junior first officer's question about route planning. He laughed at appropriate moments without overdoing it. He was building a paper trail in real time, right in front of her. She watched him without watching him, the way she had learned to observe rooms without appearing to observe them, and understood exactly what he was doing. Every pleasant interaction this morning was a future witness statement. Every collegial gesture was evidence of a man who had nothing to hide. His circle followed his lead. The 2 first officers had dialed themselves back to a careful neutrality, speaking to her once in the corridor with a brief, bland good morning that contained nothing actionable and everything intentional. The smirks were still there. They were just smaller now, turned inward. She gave no indication that she noticed any of it. The morning briefing ran short. Mercer ran through the day's flight assignments, whether over the eastern seaboard, an aircraft swap on the Frankfurt route, the usual administrative items. He did not introduce her again. He had been instructed not to. Amara had asked her father to keep the corporate spotlight minimal. The introduction had done its work yesterday. Today she needed people to forget the camera was on so she could see what they actually did when they thought nothing was being recorded. After the briefing ended, she went upstairs and began the interviews. She had decided to start with the people Brennan would never think to worry about. Junior first officers, cabin crew, ground operations. The people he had spent 30 years not bothering to learn the names of. They were the ones who saw everything. They were the ones who would talk if you gave them a reason to believe talking was safe. She conducted the first 3 interviews in her office. Brief, informal. Framed as standard onboarding conversations from the new vice president. Most were evasive, not hostile, careful. There was a difference. Hostile meant anger, and anger meant something to work with. Careful meant they had already done a calculation and decided that saying nothing was safer than saying anything. One first officer, a 6-year company veteran with 2 commendations, started to say something useful and then stopped himself mid-sentence and looked at his hands. He finished the interview without giving her anything she could use. She thanked him. She wrote his name down. The 4th interview was the flight attendant from the briefing room. The young woman with the dark hair and the tablet she had been trying to disappear into. Her name was Lana Marquez. She was 26 years old and she had been with Sterling Continental for 3 years. She knocked at 4:45 in the afternoon. She hadn't been called. She had come on her own. Amara looked up when she entered and said nothing, just gestured to the chair across the desk and waited while Lana closed the door and sat down. The young flight attendant perched on the edge of the seat with her hands pressed flat against her thighs. She was 26 years old and she looked in this moment younger than that. "I was in the briefing room yesterday," Lana said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "I was there the whole time." "I know," Amara said. Lana looked up. Something in her expression shifted. She had expected to have to argue for her own relevance and not having to seem to catch her off balance. "I didn't laugh," she said, then quieter. "But I didn't do anything either. I just sat there. I've been sitting there for 3 years." The room was quiet for a moment. "I know that too," Amara said. Lana looked at her hands. "I want to give a statement, a formal one, everything I saw, not just yesterday, before yesterday." She paused. "I know what that means. I know what Captain Brennan does to people who—" She stopped herself, swallowed. "I know what it costs." "It costs something," Amara said honestly. "I won't tell you it doesn't." Lana nodded slowly, like she had already made the decision and just needed to hear that it was real. Amara slid a formal statement form across the desk. Lana picked up the pen. Her hand was trembling, not enough to stop her, just enough to be visible. She pressed the pen to the paper and signed her name with the careful deliberateness of someone doing something they cannot undo. When she was done, she set the pen down and exhaled. "Thank you," Amara said. Lana nodded. She stood, smoothed her uniform skirt, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. "There are others," she said without turning around. "Flight attendants, junior pilots, 2 of the female captains who left last year and last year. They didn't transfer because of seniority issues. That's just what the paperwork said, a beat. They're scared, but they're there." Then she was gone. Amara looked at the signed statement for a moment. Then she put it in the folder with Beatrice's documentation. She picked up her phone and called the legal department on the executive floor. She requested formal counsel for an internal disciplinary investigation. By the next morning, she had a department attorney assigned. By that afternoon, she had a meeting on her calendar with the head of safety and standards. On day 3, she requested the cockpit voice recorder data and crew lounge security footage from the morning of her arrival. Cockpit voice recorders only captured cockpit audio, of course, and the briefing room incident had taken place in the crew lounge, not in any aircraft. But the crew lounge had 3 security cameras, one above the coffee station, one covering the main door, one in the corner near the windows. The request was filed through Mercer's office at 9 a.m. She expected the footage by end of day. Mercer came to her office at 2:15 in the afternoon. He knocked twice, entered without being invited, and stood just inside the doorway with the careful posture of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say. "About your footage request, Vice President Carter," he cleared his throat. "The crew lounge cameras. They've been non-operational for about 4 months. Amara looked up from her desk. 4 months. Give or take, maintenance backlog. It happens with the older buildings. I'll need the maintenance records." Something moved across his face. Brief, controlled, gone quickly. "Of course, I'll have them pulled. Today, please." He nodded and left. She watched the door close behind him and wrote 2 words on her legal pad: cameras, Mercer. The maintenance records arrived at 4:30. Incomplete. 3 pages where there should have been at least 8 based on the company's standard equipment logging protocol. The submission date of the original repair request was missing entirely. The technician's sign-off was blank. She requested the originals from facilities management. She was told through Mercer's assistant that the facilities log for that period was being located. She requested the IT department's equipment status report. She received a 2-line email informing her that the cameras had been flagged as non-operational and that no repair timeline had been established. She printed everything. She put it in a folder. She labeled the folder with a date and set it aside. Then she called Beatrice on the internal line. "The camera maintenance request," she said when Beatrice answered. "I need the original submission record, not the copy Mercer sent me. The original." A brief pause. "I have it," Beatrice said. "I've had it since yesterday morning. I was waiting to see what they sent you first." "Bring it up." Beatrice arrived 7 minutes later with a single printed page. She placed it on the desk face up and tapped it once with one finger before she left. Amara looked at it. The original maintenance request had a submission date. It had a requester name. It had a signature. The request had been filed 11 days before Amara's appointment had been publicly announced. 18 days before her first day. The signature at the bottom belonged to Captain Walter Brennan. Amara sat back in her chair. The cameras hadn't broken down. They had been turned off on purpose by a man who had known she was coming and had spent the weeks before her arrival making sure there would be no record of what he planned to do when she arrived. She looked out the window. The runway lights at the far end of the airfield were just beginning to come on in the autumn dusk. She picked up her pen. She turned to a fresh page. She wrote one word at the top, premeditated. Then she underlined it twice. The next morning, the Aviation Weekly online edition went live at 6:47. Amara saw it on her phone before she had even left her apartment. The headline read, "Nepotism at 35,000 feet. New Sterling VP faces internal backlash." She read it once. She read it again. The article was carefully written. No outright defamation, nothing actionable. Just a series of anonymous quotes from veteran Sterling Continental pilots describing concerns about the appointment of the chairman's daughter to a senior operational role, questions about her qualifications, suggestions of a hostile management style in her first days. One quote referenced an incident in which the new vice president had reportedly berated a senior captain in front of crew, demanded his employee number in a threatening manner, and walked out without explanation. Amara set the phone down on her kitchen counter. She poured a cup of coffee. She drank half of it standing at the window, looking out at the highway and the gray morning. Then she picked up the phone and called her father. He had already seen it. His voice had the compressed, controlled quality of a man managing serious anger in a professional context. "I want him on a flight status review by noon," her father said. "Not yet," she said, a long pause. "Amara, Dad, listen to me. If we move on him in response to this article, every captain in this airline who is loyal to him will close ranks within 24 hours. The story becomes family corporation crushes whistleblowing veteran. We lose the entire narrative. We lose the OPS review. We lose the federal aviation regulatory window Alina has been building toward." She paused. "I need them to think it's working. I need Brennan to believe that this article worked, that I'm panicking, that I'm scrambling to defend myself. Because every day he believes that is another day I get to keep building the case." Her father was quiet for a long moment. "72 hours has come and gone," he said finally. "I know. I'm giving you the rest of this week, Friday end of business. Then I act, Amara, with or without your readiness." "That's fair." She hung up. She finished her coffee. She drove to the operations center. By the time she arrived, the article had been read by every pilot on the morning roster. She could see it in the way the room shifted when she walked through the lobby. A new kind of attention, not the stunned silence of 2 days ago, something more calculated. Some of the pilots, the ones in Brennan's circle, were carrying themselves with a new looseness, a subtle vindication. They believed the wind had turned. Good, let them believe it. She walked through the lobby at the same even pace. She did not acknowledge any of them. She went straight to her office. Beatrice was already at her desk on the 4th floor. She set down a fresh folder as Amara passed. Amara picked it up without breaking stride. Inside her office, she closed the door and opened the folder. Beatrice had done it again. 3 more former employee names. 2 female pilots and 1 female first officer who had resigned in the past 4 years. All 3 of their personnel files contained nearly identical patterns. A complaint filed against the woman shortly after she had pushed back on something Brennan had done or said. A quiet internal resolution that landed in the woman's permanent file as a behavioral notation. A resignation within 90 days. 2 of the 3 had subsequently taken positions at competing airlines with no loss of seniority, which meant they had been good pilots. Excellent pilots. Pilots Sterling Continental had lost for no reason except that they had been in the wrong cockpit with the wrong captain at the wrong time. Amara picked up her phone. She called the first name on the list, Captain Renee Acaffer, currently flying narrow-body domestic routes for a competitor based out of Atlanta. The phone rang 4 times. A woman's voice answered, professional and slightly clipped. "This is Renee Acaffer." Amara identified herself fully. Name, title, airline. She didn't soften it or ease into it. She had learned a long time ago that people who had been burned by institutions needed to know exactly who they were talking to before they decided whether to keep talking. There was a long pause after Amara finished speaking. "I heard they appointed someone new," Renee said finally. Her voice was measured, not cold but careful, the voice of a woman who had learned to be careful. "I didn't know it was you." "I'd like to meet," Amara said. "Off the record, not at the operations center. Not in any Sterling property." Another pause, shorter this time. "I'm laying over in Charlotte tomorrow. There's a hotel bar on Tryon Street. I can be there at 4 in the afternoon." "I'll be there," she hung up. She called the second name, then the third. By noon, she had 3 confirmed meetings. By Thursday evening, she had spoken with all 3. Renee Acaffer in Charlotte. First Officer Diana Park over a secure video call from her layover hotel in Seattle. And Captain Yolanda Brooks, who had left aviation entirely after Sterling Continental and was now teaching aviation safety at a community college in Phoenix. Each of them carried the same shape of story. Each of them, separately, named Walter Brennan. Each of them had kept documentation, emails, internal memos, screenshots of group chats they had been excluded from but had been forwarded by sympathetic colleagues. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years of evidence sitting in shoeboxes and external hard drives and locked email folders, waiting for someone to come along who was worth handing them to. By Friday morning, Amara had it all. 18 separate documents from Renee, 23 from Diana. Yolanda had sent her a single encrypted file containing 6 years of meticulous notes. Amara forwarded the entire package to the company attorney, to the head of safety and standards, to Alina Chen, and to her father. She copied the Federal Aviation Regulatory Liaison her father had been quietly briefing for the past 3 weeks. At 7:30 a.m. on Friday, Marcus Sterling made one phone call. By 8 a.m., Walter Brennan had been formally removed from the flight schedule pending an internal disciplinary review. By 8:15, the 2 first officers from the briefing room had been placed on administrative leave. By 9, the FAA had opened a parallel inquiry into the documented pattern of harassment and forced attrition at Sterling Continental's Western hub. Amara arrived at the operations center at 9:30. She walked through the lobby and the new attention from yesterday had transformed into something else entirely. A held breath, a waiting. The pilots loyal to Brennan understood all at once and with complete clarity that they had badly misread the wind. She went upstairs. She sat at her desk. She watered the orchid. It was still wilting, but it was hanging on. She thought she might be able to save it after all. Mercer came to her office at 10:20. He knocked once and entered without waiting. He looked terrible, not sick, not physically, but the particular terrible of a man who had spent the previous night arguing with himself and lost. "I need to talk to you," he said. "If you'll let me." She looked at him for a moment, at the hollowed eyes and the careful hands and the expression of a man holding something he needed to put down. "Sit down, Howard." He sat across from her desk with his hands clasped in his lap, leaning slightly forward like a man in a waiting room bracing for difficult news. Except he was the one who had come here. He was the one who had brought the difficult news with him. She waited. He filled the silence. "Brennan called me last night, around 9. He wasn't asking. He was making it clear that he expected me to stay consistent in whatever I said to the review board. Those were his words. Stay consistent." A short, humorless exhale. "He reminded me that we'd been working together for 26 years and that people who understood how things worked tended to come out fine. People who didn't. "That's a threat," Amara said. "Yes," Mercer said simply. "It is." He was quiet for a moment. She let him be quiet. "I've been at this airline for 26 years, he said. "I've watched things happen in this hangar that I looked away from, not because I didn't know they were wrong. Because it was easier. Because the price of not looking away seemed too high." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. He leaned forward and placed it on the desk between them. "That's a written statement. Everything I witnessed in the briefing room on your first morning. Everything I knew about Brennan before then. The maintenance request irregularities I noticed and did not report. The complaints I rerouted to internal HR resolution when they should have gone to the safety board. I've signed it. I'll testify to it. I'll resign at the end of this review if that's what's required. Amara looked at the document. She didn't pick it up yet. What changed? She asked, not accusatory, genuine. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, complicated and private. I have a granddaughter who's 17 years old, he said. She wants to be a pilot. She's been training since she was 14. She got her private pilot's license 2 months ago. He paused. I sat in my kitchen last night after Brennan's call, and I thought about her walking into a briefing room someday and being handed a coffee cup the way you were. And I thought about the fact that I had spent 26 years building the kind of hangar where that would happen to her. And I couldn't sleep. He looked up at Amara directly. I have been doing nothing for 26 years, and I have a granddaughter who is going to walk into someone's cockpit in 5 years and need to be safe there. I'm very late to this. I know that, but I am here now. She held his gaze. She thought about 9 names in a column on her legal pad. She thought about Renee and Diana and Yolanda, about Lana's shaking hands signing a statement she couldn't unsign. She thought about all the Howard Mercers in all the airlines in all the years. The men who weren't cruel, who weren't the ones pouring coffee or filing false complaints, but who had learned to make themselves invisible when it mattered, who had calculated the cost of doing the right thing and decided the price was too high, and then sat in kitchens at 9 p.m. listening to threats on their phones, slowly understanding what their silence had been building toward all along. She didn't offer him absolution. It wasn't hers to give. The 9 people in that column hadn't put her here to forgive the men who watched it happen, but she also understood that a man who arrived late at the right choice was still a man who had arrived. I need you at that review board, Howard. Truthful testimony. Everything you know and everything you saw and everything you were told to stay consistent about. She held his gaze. Can you do that? Yes, he said. No hesitation. Then be in that room. She picked up the statement and placed it in her folder. He stood and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, he said without turning around. I'm sorry for all of it, for 26 years of it. She looked at the back of his head, at the graying hair and the tired shoulders of a man who had finally, at great personal cost and considerably late, done the thing he should have done a long time ago. Be in that room, Howard. That's worth something. He left. The disciplinary review board convened the following Wednesday in the corporate conference room on the 15th floor of the Sterling Continental Headquarters Tower. Walter Brennan walked in wearing his full captain's uniform with all 4 stripes still on his shoulders, flanked by an attorney from the pilots' union. He sat at the long table with the practiced confidence of a man who believed that 30 years of seniority and a powerful union representative would carry him through one more difficult conversation. He had no idea what was about to land on him. Amara presented the documentation in sequence. The briefing room incident, corroborated by Lana Marquez's signed statement and the testimony of 2 junior pilots who had come forward in the previous 48 hours. The maintenance request bearing his own signature, dated 18 days before her first day, deactivating the only cameras that could have recorded what he did. The 7-year pattern of complaints, resignations, and forced transfers. The testimony from Renee Acaffer delivered via secure video link. The documentation from Diana Park. The encrypted file from Yolanda Brooks, now decrypted and printed and laid out across the conference room table in 3 neat stacks. And finally, Howard Mercer's signed statement, read aloud into the record by the senior member of the review board with the same flat, methodical tone she had used for everything else. Brennan's face changed during Mercer's statement. The confidence flickered first, then the careful neutrality cracked. By the time the senior board member reached the section detailing the threatening phone call Brennan had made on the night of day 6, his face had gone the color of old chalk. His attorney leaned over and said something low and urgent in his ear. Brennan did not respond. The board deliberated for 47 minutes. The recommendation came down at 4:15 that afternoon. Immediate termination for cause, forfeit of pension. Federal Aviation Regulatory Referral for falsification of equipment records and obstruction of an internal safety investigation, permanent revocation of his Sterling Continental flight credentials, a formal recommendation to the FAA for review of his airline transport pilot certificate. He walked out of the conference room without his stripes. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning at 7:43 a.m., 1 minute later than her first day, a fact she noted without significance and let go, Amara pulled into the parking lot of the Sterling Continental Operations Center. She sat in her car for a moment in the quiet of an early autumn morning. Then she picked up her flight bag and walked into the lobby. The desk officer looked up and came to attention. "Good morning, Vice President Carter." "Good morning, Hector." She had learned everyone's names by now. She kept moving. Upstairs, Beatrice was at her desk, glasses on, fresh coffee beside her monitor. The expression on her face had settled into something more open over the past 3 weeks. The face of a person who had put something down and discovered she could move more freely without it. "Morning, Vice President Carter." "Morning, Ms. Whitman." In her office, the orchid on the windowsill had recovered. New growth at the base, small and green and slightly ridiculous against the gray autumn sky. She had not replaced it with anything better. She had just kept watering it. She sat down at her desk. She opened the first personnel file of the morning. A new captain's recommendation packet for a female first officer named Yoon Park, who had been flying domestic routes for Sterling Continental for 6 years, and who had, until Amara's appointment, been quietly passed over for promotion 3 times. The packet had been sitting in pending status for 14 months. Amara signed it. She placed it in the outbound folder for Elena Chen's signature. She turned to the next file. Outside her window, aircraft were lining up on the taxiway, navigation lights blinking in the morning haze. Her airline, her hangar, her people. She picked up her pen. She had work to do. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day. Peace.